3 years after the Great Departure, a single unarmed alien vessel approached the edge of human space. The ship was small and bore no weapons or defensive systems. Most importantly, it carried no military insignia or government seals. It was a civilian vessel crewed by beings who came not as conquerors but as supplicants. Ambassador Frank Miller waited in the docking bay of Haven Station as the alien delegation disembarked. Frank had been chosen to represent humanity in these final negotiations because he understood both the price of pride and the value of redemption. He had been there when humans made the decision to leave. Now he would help decide whether they would return. The alien delegation was smaller than Frank had expected. Only 5 beings representing the major species that remained. Chancellor Vexitar of the Zephyrians looked older, and his silver eyes held none of the arrogance Frank remembered. Speaker Zarthul of the Crystalline Collective pulsed with dim, uncertain light. Queen Mektar of the Korvax moved with the exhaustion of a leader who had watched her people suffer. Admiral Mordak of the Draconians stood with the bearing of a warrior who had learned the difference between strength and power. Most surprising was the presence of Elder Bluanda of the Aquatic Federation, who had never left her ocean world before. Ambassador Miller, Chancellor Vextar began, his voice lacking its former commanding tone. We come to you as representatives of what remains of galactic civilization. Frank gestured for them to follow him to the conference room. The station around them was a marvel of human engineering that seemed to grow and adapt as they walked through it. Walls shifted to accommodate the different atmospheric needs of the delegates. Gravity adjusted automatically for species that were used to different conditions. Translation systems provided perfect communication without any of the awkward delays. The aliens remembered. What remains? Frank asked as they took their seats around a table that materialized from the floor. I was under the impression that the galaxy was quite large. Queen Mektar spoke first, her compound eyes reflecting the soft lighting. 17 species have gone extinct since you left, Ambassador. Not from war or disease, but from simple system failures they could not repair. 32 worlds have been abandoned because life support could not be maintained. The Tauri Commonwealth collapsed entirely when their water recycling plants failed simultaneously. The numbers were staggering, but Frank showed no emotion. These beings had made their choice when they treated humans as expendable servants. Now, they were learning the consequences. Speaker Zarthul pulsed with patterns that indicated deep distress. We offer everything, Ambassador. Full voting rights in a reformed galactic council, shared governance of all major systems, economic partnerships based on complete equality. We will even establish human colonies throughout our territories if you wish. Elder Bluanda had not spoken yet, but her bioluminescent patterns showed the underwater equivalent of tears. Our children are dying, Ambassador, not from war or violence, but from systems we cannot fix. We know now what we refused to see before. You were never our servants. You were our partners, and we were too proud to admit it. Frank studied each delegate carefully. Behind their words, he could see genuine desperation, but also something else. Understanding. For the first time in galactic history, these species were beginning to comprehend their own limitations. Tell me what you have learned, Frank said quietly. Admiral Mordak straightened his military bearing, returning for a moment. We learned that following procedures is not the same as understanding principles. We learned that mathematical perfection means nothing if you cannot adapt to chaos. We learned that specialized intelligence is useless without general problem-solving ability. Chancellor Vextar nodded agreement. Most importantly, we learned that cooperation cannot be forced. It must be freely given by equals who respect each other. Frank activated a communicator and spoke to President Carol Stone, who was monitoring the negotiations from New Terra. They seem to understand, Madam President. The question is whether understanding is enough. The response came immediately. Bring them to New Terra, Frank. Let them see what we have built. Then we will know if they are ready for true partnership. The journey to New Terra took 2 days, during which the alien delegates experienced human space travel for the first time. The ships moved through dimensions that aliens had not known existed. Navigation was handled by artificial intelligences that seemed to think and adapt like living beings. Most disturbing of all, the technology seemed to anticipate problems and solve them before they occurred. "How did you advance so quickly?" asked Speaker Zarthol as he watched holographic displays that showed system status in ways no alien computer could match. Dr. Rachel Green, who had joined the delegation, answered with a smile. "We stopped maintaining your infrastructure and started focusing on innovation. Turns out humans are pretty good at invention when we are not spending all our time fixing other people's mistakes." New Terra was unlike anything the aliens had ever seen. The cities seemed to grow from the landscape itself, adapting to natural features rather than imposing geometric patterns. Transportation moved in 3 dimensions through the air and underground. Most remarkably, the entire planet seemed to be a single integrated system where every component supported every other component. President Carol Stone met the delegation in a garden that floated above the clouds. Around them, earth plants grew alongside species from dozens of worlds, creating ecosystems that should have been impossible, but somehow thrived. It was a living demonstration of what cooperation could achieve. "Welcome to New Terra," Carol said, gesturing to the impossible garden around them. "This is what humans build when we are free to innovate instead of just maintain." Queen Mektar stared at the mixed ecosystem with wonder. "How do you balance so many competing species? How do you prevent any one group from dominating?" "We do not control it," replied Dr. Sarah Collins, who had joined them from her research station. "We guide it. We provide the conditions for cooperation and let each species contribute what it does best, just like we want to do with galactic civilization." The negotiations that followed lasted for weeks. Every detail had to be worked out carefully because this time there would be no misunderstandings about humanity's role. Humans would return to the galaxy, but as equal partners, not as problem solvers for hire. The new Galactic Alliance would be based on mutual respect and shared governance. Most importantly, humans would teach other species the principles behind their problem-solving abilities. It would take generations, but eventually every species would develop the flexible thinking needed to maintain advanced civilization. Admiral Ryan Clark commanded the first human vessel to return to galactic space in 3 years. The Defiance carried not weapons, but engineers and teachers. Behind it came a fleet of ships loaded with new technology and fresh ideas. The reception was unlike anything humans had experienced before. On every world, crowds gathered to welcome them back. These were not the dismissive audiences of the past, but beings who genuinely understood what they had lost. On Zephyria Prime, Chancellor Vextar personally greeted the human engineers who would help restore the food distribution network. "We are grateful for your return," he said with genuine humility. "But more than that, we are grateful for the chance to learn from our mistakes." Commander Tony Brooks oversaw the reconstruction efforts from the bridge of the engineering vessel, Restoration. Around him, humans and aliens worked together on equal terms, sharing knowledge and solving problems as partners. The work was challenging but rewarding because everyone understood that they were building something better than what had existed before. The food distribution network that emerged was not just a copy of what had failed. It was a hybrid system that combined Zephyrian mathematical precision with human adaptability. When unexpected problems arose, both species worked together to find solutions rather than humans handling everything alone. Similar cooperation was happening throughout the galaxy. On Korvax worlds, human ecologists worked with hive engineers to create terraforming systems that could adapt to changing conditions. In the crystalline territories, human intuition was combined with alien logic to produce technologies that neither species could have imagined alone. The Aquatic Federation learned to balance their current-powered generators by developing an intuitive understanding of ocean flows rather than relying purely on calculations. Human teachers worked underwater alongside aquatic engineers, showing them how to feel the rhythm of the water instead of just measuring it. Most remarkably, the species that had been enemies for millennia found themselves working together on projects that benefited everyone. The shared experience of near extinction had taught them that cooperation was more valuable than competition. Frank Miller stood in the reformed Galactic Council chamber, watching representatives from over 200 species debate the latest infrastructure project. The chamber itself was a symbol of the new age. Instead of rigid seating arrangements, species were grouped by expertise rather than politics. Humans sat alongside aliens who shared their interests, creating working groups that crossed all traditional boundaries. The debate was about establishing a galaxy-wide early warning system for infrastructure failures. 1 year after the humans left, the galaxy faced its first major crisis. Admiral Kate Phillips stood on the bridge of the human colony ship Liberty, watching the emergency broadcasts from the core worlds. The primary trade route that connected the heart of galactic civilization to the outer colonies had completely collapsed. The crisis began when navigation beacon array Sigma-7 failed during a routine cargo convoy. 15 massive freighters carrying food and medical supplies lost their way in the void between star systems. Without the beacons to guide them, they could not find their destinations. Worse, they could not find their way back home. Kate watched the alien news reports with growing concern. The convoy had been missing for 3 weeks. Search and rescue teams could not locate the ships because the navigation systems they relied on were the same ones that had failed in the first place. It was like being lost in a forest and asking someone else who was equally lost for directions. "The irony is painful," commented Commander Bob Tucker, Kate's second in command. "They have faster-than-light travel, but they cannot find their way home." The human fleet was now 6 months into their journey to the Andromeda Arm. They had established temporary colonies on 3 worlds and were preparing to build the first permanent human settlements outside the galaxy. Every day brought reports of new disasters from the civilization they had left behind. On Zephyria Prime, Chancellor Vextar stood before the Emergency Council trying to maintain order as his world faced the worst crisis in its history. The food distribution network had completely broken down 3 days ago when the central computer system crashed while trying to recalculate delivery routes around failed infrastructure. 17 million citizens in the northern continent have been without food deliveries for 72 hours, reported Supply Coordinator Dalmar. The backup distribution system requires manual route planning, but our computers cannot handle the variables involved. Vextar felt something he had never experienced before: helplessness. The Zephyrian mind was perfect for mathematical calculations, but food distribution was not just about math. It was about dealing with broken roads and delayed shipments and workers who called in sick and vehicles that broke down at the worst possible times. It required the kind of flexible thinking that could adapt to chaos. Humans had made it look easy. They would glance at a problem for a few minutes, then suggest a solution that somehow worked, despite seeming to violate mathematical logic. Zephyrians had dismissed this as primitive intuition. Now they were learning that intuition might be more valuable than precision. In the deep ocean cities of Aquatica, the situation was even worse. The Aquatic Federation depended on current-powered generators to provide energy for their civilization. The generators required constant adjustment as ocean currents shifted with tides and weather patterns. Human technicians had maintained these systems for decades, making tiny corrections that kept the power flowing smoothly. Engineer Bluanda floated in the control center of Generator Complex Delta, watching the power output fluctuate wildly. Her people could read the current flows perfectly and calculate exactly how the generators should be positioned. But by the time they completed their calculations and moved the generators, the currents had already changed. "We need to predict the changes," suggested her assistant Flomar. "If we can calculate where the currents will be, we can position the generators in advance." Bluanda had tried this approach for weeks. Ocean currents were influenced by thousands of factors, including wind patterns, weather systems, and even the gravitational pull of moons. No computer could track all the variables. Humans had solved the problem by developing an intuitive feel for the water. They could sense when a current was about to shift and make adjustments before the change happened. The Aquatic Federation was discovering that some problems could not be solved with logic alone. On the insectoid worlds of the Korvax hive, the terraforming projects that had taken centuries to complete were failing catastrophically. Queen Mektar observed through the compound eyes of 1,000 worker drones as the carefully planned ecosystem of new Korvax began to collapse. The problem had started small. A species of pollinating insects that was supposed to maintain the plant life had begun dying off. The Korvaxian ecological engineers calculated exactly how many replacement insects were needed and introduced them to the environment. But instead of stabilizing, the system got worse. The replacement insects competed with native species for resources. Plants that had flourished for decades began dying. Animals that depended on those plants started starving. Within months, the entire ecosystem was in chaos. Queen Mektar linked her consciousness with the hive mind to search for a solution. 10,000 Korvaxian intellects worked together, analyzing data and running simulations. They could model every interaction between every species with mathematical precision. But ecosystems were not mathematical constructs. They were living systems that grew and changed in unpredictable ways. Human ecological engineers had understood this instinctively. They did not try to control ecosystems. They guided them, allowing for natural variation and adapting their plans when unexpected changes occurred. They treated terraforming as an art rather than a science. The hive mind was learning that perfection and control were not the same thing. Dr. Sarah Collins watched the reports from her observation post with growing alarm. The situation was spiraling out of control faster than anyone had predicted. What had started as technical problems was becoming a full-scale civilizational collapse. The alien governments were turning on each other with increasing desperation. The Draconian Empire had cut off all trade with the Crystalline Collective, accusing them of hoarding repair parts. The ethereal consciousness had withdrawn from the Galactic Council, claiming that physical beings were incapable of logical thinking. Even worse, some species were beginning to fragment internally. The normally unified Korvax hive had split into 3 separate factions, arguing over how to handle the terraforming crisis. The Aquatic Federation was seeing open rebellion as starving cities demanded that their governments find solutions that did not exist. Sarah sent an urgent report to the human colonial fleet. The situation is deteriorating beyond our worst projections. We are looking at potential species extinction events if this continues. Multiple civilizations are entering terminal decline simultaneously. The response came from Admiral Kate Phillips personally. We knew this might happen, Sarah. The question is whether they will ask for help before it is too late or let pride destroy them completely. On Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council met in emergency session, but the great chamber that had once hosted representatives from hundreds of worlds now held only a few dozen delegates. Many species had withdrawn to deal with their own crises. Others had simply stopped responding to communications. Those who remained were desperate. Speaker Zarthul, of the Crystalline Collective, had abandoned the perfect logic that defined his species and was actually pleading for help. We must contact the humans. Our pride is not worth the extinction of our civilizations. But Chancellor Vextar refused to consider surrender. We do not need them. Our scientists are developing solutions. We just need more time. Time was the one thing they did not have. Every day brought new failures as systems that had worked perfectly for decades finally broke down completely. The galaxy was discovering that maintenance was not about following procedures. It was about understanding how things worked well enough to fix them when they stopped working, and only humans seemed to have that kind of understanding. Admiral Kate Phillips stood in the command center of New Terra, the first human colony in the Andromeda Arm. Around her screens showed the progress of construction as humans built a new civilization from scratch. They were not just copying what they had left behind. They were innovating, creating technologies and social systems that surpassed anything in the old galaxy. Should we offer to help them, Kate? Asked Dr. Rachel Green, who had been monitoring the situation. We could save millions of lives. Kate considered this carefully. Helping now would only enable the aliens to continue treating humans as servants. They needed to learn that cooperation meant equality. Sometimes the most compassionate thing to do was to let someone fail so they could learn from their mistakes. Not yet, Rachel. They need to ask first, and they need to understand that if we help, it will be as equals, not as repair crews. The fate of galactic civilization hung in the balance. In the coming months, it would become clear whether alien pride was stronger than their survival instinct. 2 years after the human departure, Chancellor Vexatar stood in the ruins of what had once been the most advanced council chamber in the galaxy. Half the lights had failed and the air recycling system made grinding noises that meant it would not last much longer. Around him, the surviving members of the Galactic Council debated the unthinkable. "We must force them to return," Vextar declared, his silver eyes reflecting the flickering emergency lighting. "The Draconian fleet is ready. The aquatic submarines can breach their defenses. Even the Crystalline Collective has agreed to provide tactical support." Speaker Zarthul pulsed with dim light as he responded. "Military action is our only remaining option. Diplomatic requests have been ignored. Economic incentives have been rejected. Pride has doomed us all. The plan was simple in concept, but desperate in execution. Every remaining military force in the galaxy would combine into a single invasion fleet. They would travel to the Andromeda Arm where humans had established their new colonies and demand their return. If humans refused, they would be taken by force. It was the largest military alliance in galactic history. Species that had been enemies for millennia were working together because they had no choice. The proud Draconian Empire with their massive battlecruisers had joined forces with the Aquatic Federation and their stealth submarines. The insectoid Korvax provided swarm fighters, while the ethereal consciousness offered their reality-warping weapons. Captain Ben Taylor commanded the human reconnaissance vessel Shadow as it monitored the alien fleet assembly. His ship was invisible to alien sensors using technology that humans had developed after leaving the galaxy. Free from the burden of maintaining alien infrastructure, human innovation had accelerated beyond anything they had achieved before. "They have over 3,000 ships, Captain," reported sensor specialist Linda Ross. "Every major species except the Tauri Commonwealth is represented. It looks like they are preparing for total war." Ben studied the tactical displays with growing concern. The alien fleet was massive, but it was also desperate. Desperate enemies made dangerous enemies because they had nothing left to lose. He activated the quantum communicator to send a priority message to Admiral Kate Phillips. "Admiral, this is Shadow Reconnaissance. The aliens are coming and they are bringing everything they have." The response came back immediately. "Understood, Captain. Return to New Terra immediately. It is time to show them what humans can really do." Admiral Kate Phillips stood in the command center of New Terra, watching the defensive preparations with quiet confidence. The human colonies in Andromeda were no longer the struggling settlements they had been a year ago. They had grown into something magnificent. The technology was beyond anything the old galaxy had seen. Human engineers, working without the constraint of maintaining alien systems, had created innovations that seemed like magic. Ships that could phase in and out of normal space. Weapons that could target enemies across dimensions. Defensive shields that adapted to any attack automatically. Commander Amy Foster coordinated the defense fleet from the bridge of the new flagship Defiance. Around her floated holographic displays showing every human ship in the Andromeda colonies. They numbered only in the hundreds compared to the thousands of alien vessels approaching, but the difference in capability was staggering. "All ships report ready, Admiral," Amy announced. "New Terra defense grid is online. Colony worlds are secured. We are prepared for anything they can throw at us." Kate nodded but felt a sadness she could not shake. It should not have come to this. If the aliens had simply treated humans as equals, none of this would have been necessary. Now they were about to learn a harsh lesson about the difference between operating technology and truly understanding it. The alien invasion fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Andromeda Arm, like a swarm of angry insects. Admiral Mordak of the Draconian fleet took overall command from his flagship Conqueror. Around him floated displays showing the scope of the operation. "All ships maintain formation," Mordak ordered. "We advance on the human colonies as one unified force. They cannot possibly resist this much firepower." The Dragon Admiral had fought many battles across his long career, but never one this important. The survival of galactic civilization depended on bringing the humans back. If this invasion failed, there would be nothing left to save. As the alien fleet moved deeper into human space, they encountered the first defensive line. A handful of human ships appeared on their sensors, moving to intercept the massive invasion force. The aliens outnumbered them 50-1. "This is pathetic," sneered Captain Veltar, commanding a Zephyrian destroyer. "They send a few dozen ships against thousands. Human arrogance knows no bounds. The first engagement lasted exactly 47 seconds. The human ships moved in ways that seemed to violate physics, appearing and disappearing at will. Their weapons passed through alien shields as if they did not exist. In less than a minute, 300 alien vessels were drifting wreckage and the human ships had vanished without taking a single casualty. Admiral Mordak stared at his tactical display in disbelief. The readings made no sense. Human ships that had been in front of his fleet were now behind it. Weapons fire that should have missed had somehow curved through space to hit their targets. Shields that had protected alien ships for centuries had simply been ignored. "How is this possible?" demanded Speaker Zarthul from the crystalline command ship. "Our sensors cannot track their movements. Our shields cannot stop their weapons. What have they become?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Dr. Alex Brown appeared on every alien communication channel broadcasting from the human flagship Defiance. The xenobiologist who had once studied alien psychology now looked at his former colleagues with something approaching pity. "You made a fundamental mistake," Alex said calmly. "You assumed that because you could operate our technology you understood it. But understanding requires more than following procedures. It requires the ability to see beyond what you know and imagine what might be possible." The alien fleet continued its advance, but with much less confidence. Every few hours they encountered another human defensive line, and every time the result was the same. Alien ships destroyed without humans taking any meaningful losses. The impossible technology was demoralizing alien crews who had never seen anything like it. On the bridge of Conqueror, Admiral Mordak made the hardest decision of his military career. "All ships halt advance. Request immediate communication with human command." The response came from Admiral Kate Phillips herself, appearing on the main screen of every alien ship simultaneously. She looked older than Mordak remembered, but her eyes held a strength that had not been there during the diplomatic meetings of years past. "Admiral Mordak," Kate said with formal politeness, "I assume you are here to discuss our return to the galaxy." "Admiral Phillips," Mordak replied, struggling to maintain his dignity. "The Galactic Council demands that humanity resume its obligations to galactic civilization. Millions are dying because of your abandonment." Kate's expression did not change, but Mordak could see steel in her eyes. "Demands, Admiral, really? You invade our territory with 3,000 ships and make demands. I think you misunderstand the situation." To demonstrate her point, human ships began appearing around the alien fleet, not dozens or hundreds but thousands. They had been there all along, invisible to alien sensors, waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. The invasion force was completely surrounded. "You have two choices, Admiral," Kate continued. "You can return to the galaxy and tell the Council that humans will consider negotiations when they are ready to treat us as equals. Or you can continue this invasion and learn exactly how advanced we have become in your absence." Admiral Mordak looked at his tactical display showing human ships in every direction. His 3,000 vessels seemed suddenly very small compared to the defensive force that surrounded them. The aliens had come to capture humanity's greatest weakness, their need to help others. Instead, they had discovered humanity's greatest strength, their ability to grow beyond any limitation. "We will return to the galaxy," Mordak said quietly. "But the Council will not accept failure. They will try again." Kate's smile was sad but determined. "Then they will keep failing until they learn the lesson we have been trying to teach them for centuries. Cooperation requires respect, and respect cannot be taken by force." As the alien fleet began its long journey home, the truth was becoming clear to everyone. Humanity had not just left the galaxy, they had evolved beyond it. The question now was whether galactic civilization could swallow its pride long enough to survive what was coming next. 6 months had passed since the humans left, and Chief Engineer Thokval was starting to worry. He stood in the control room of Atmospheric Processor 7 on the industrial world of Korvax. Red warning lights blinked across the main display panel. The massive machine that cleaned the air for 12 million Korvaxians was making sounds it had never made before. Thokval's forearms moved quickly over the control surfaces. His species was known throughout the galaxy for their ability to work together on complex problems. Every Korvaxian could link their mind with others to share knowledge instantly. It was how they had built their great hive cities and industrial complexes. But today the hive mind was confused. None of the 30 engineers linked to Thokaval could understand what was wrong with the processor. They knew how to operate it. They had been doing that for 50 years since the humans built it. But operating something and fixing it were very different things. The backup filters are showing stress fractures, reported sub-engineer Clactor through the mental link. But the replacement procedure in the human manual requires improvisation based on environmental factors. Thokval felt the confusion ripple through the linked minds. Improvisation was not something Korvaxians did well. Their strength was following procedures exactly. When the procedures did not cover every possible situation, they struggled. The human manual said to adjust the filter, alignment based on current atmospheric pressure and dust content. It sounded simple, but there were thousands of variables to consider. The humans who wrote the manual seemed to expect the reader to figure out the details themselves. On the research station, Babylon 7, Dr. Emma Davis was having similar problems. She was the last human scientist still in contact with alien colleagues. Her research on cross-species communication had been too important to abandon immediately, but every day brought new requests for help that she was forbidden to answer. Her computer showed 47 urgent messages from former research partners. The Zephyrians' quantum computers were producing calculation errors. Their perfect mathematical minds could not understand why the machines they had operated flawlessly for decades were suddenly unreliable. Emma knew the answer. Quantum computers needed constant tiny adjustments to account for cosmic radiation interference and gravitational fluctuations. Humans had been making these adjustments automatically for so long that most aliens never realized it was happening. Dr. Davis came a transmission from Professor Zilmath on Zephyria Prime. Our primary calculation matrix is showing a 3% error rate. This should be impossible according to our mathematical models. We have followed every maintenance procedure exactly. Emma stared at the message for a long time. 3% might not sound like much, but in quantum computing it was catastrophic. Navigation systems would fail. Life support calculations would become unreliable. Economic models would collapse. She started to write a reply explaining about quantum drift compensation, but stopped herself. Humans had made their choice. She deleted the message without responding. Captain Steve Rogers commanded the human vessel New Frontier as it traveled through the void between galaxies. His ship was part of the great human exodus to the Andromeda Arm. The journey would take 3 years, but they were in no hurry. Behind them, the galaxy they had left was learning to survive without human help. Steve's communication officer, Lieutenant Karen White, brought him the daily intelligence reports. Human monitoring stations hidden throughout the galaxy still sent automated updates on alien activities. Supply chain failures are spreading, Captain Karen reported. The trade route between the crystalline worlds and the outer rim has completely collapsed. Ships are getting lost because the navigation beacons are failing. Steve nodded grimly. He had helped design those navigation beacons 20 years ago. They seemed simple enough. Point them at the stars and they tell ships where they are. But the reality was much more complex. The beacons needed constant micro-adjustments as stars moved and gravitational fields shifted. A human technician would notice when something felt wrong and make corrections. Alien technicians followed procedures that assumed nothing would change. Any response from the Galactic Council? Steve asked. They issued a statement saying the beacon failures are temporary technical difficulties, Karen replied. They expect to have them resolved soon. Steve almost felt sorry for them. The aliens were so convinced of their own superiority that they could not admit they needed help. Pride would be their downfall. On the crystal world of Nextera, the crystalline collective was discovering just how much they had depended on human innovation. The collective consciousness that linked all crystalline beings was perfect for sharing information, but terrible at creating new ideas. Speaker Zarthul interfaced with the collective mind as it tried to solve the navigation beacon problem. Thousands of crystalline intellects worked together, processing data and running calculations. They could determine exactly what was wrong with each beacon. Gravitational drift had moved them out of alignment by 0.003 degrees. The solution should have been simple: move the beacons back into alignment. But when they tried this, the beacons moved out of alignment again within days. Something was causing continuous drift that their calculations could not predict. A human engineer would have realized that space was not empty. Tiny particles and energy fields constantly pushed against the beacons in random ways. The original human designers had built in automatic compensation systems that learned from experience. But learning from experience required the kind of flexible thinking that crystalline minds could not achieve. The collective spent days trying to create mathematical formulas to predict every possible influence on the beacons. It was impossible. There were too many variables and too many unknowns. For the first time in their species' history, the crystalline collective encountered a problem that pure logic could not solve. Dr. Sarah Collins monitored the situation from the human observation post watchtower hidden in an asteroid field. Her job was to study the effects of human withdrawal on galactic civilization. What she was seeing disturbed her more than she had expected. The aliens were not just struggling with technical problems, they were beginning to panic. Every alien species had evolved specialized intelligence that worked perfectly for their original environment. But modern galactic civilization was too complex for any single type of thinking to handle. Sarah watched the news feeds from across the galaxy. On Zephyria Prime, food distribution was breaking down because the logistics computers could not handle unexpected delays and route changes. The Zephyrians could calculate the most efficient distribution network perfectly, but when reality did not match their calculations, they had no idea how to adapt. The insectoid worlds were seeing their terraforming projects fail as ecosystems became unbalanced. Hive minds were excellent at coordinating large projects, but they could not understand the chaotic interactions between different species that made ecosystems stable. Even worse, the alien governments were starting to turn on each other. The Draconian Empire blamed the Aquatic Federation for trade route failures. The ethereal consciousness accused the Corvaxians of hoarding resources. Old alliances were breaking down as the stress of maintaining civilization without human help grew too great. Sarah realized that humanity had not just been the repair crew of the galaxy, they had been the glue that held everything together. Their ability to solve unexpected problems and adapt to changing situations had prevented countless small failures from becoming major disasters. Now that glue was gone, and the cracks were starting to show everywhere. On her private communication channel, Sarah received a message from her old friend Dr. Rachel Green, who was now with the human colonial fleet. "How bad is it, Sarah?" Rachel asked. Sarah looked at her monitors showing failing systems across dozens of worlds. "Worse than we thought. They are not just losing technology. They are losing the ability to work together. Another few months of this, and we might be looking at the collapse of galactic civilization itself." The message that came back from Rachel was simple, but chilling. Maybe that is what they need. Maybe they need to fall before they can learn to respect what they lost. Captain Jake Morrison stood at the center of the massive council chamber on Nexus Prime. The dome above him stretched so high that clouds formed near the ceiling. Around him sat representatives from every major species in the galaxy. The Zephyrians, with their tall blue bodies and silver eyes, looked down from their floating platforms. The crystalline beings reflected light in rainbow patterns across the walls. The insect-like Corvaxians clicked their mandibles in what humans had learned meant impatience. Jake held a simple datapad in his hands. The message on it would change everything. He had read it 100 times during the long journey to this place. Each time the words felt heavier in his mind. Ambassador Lisa Carter walked up beside him. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes. For 30 years she had worked to make peace between humans and aliens. Today she would destroy that peace forever. "Are you ready for this, Jake?" Lisa asked quietly. Jake nodded. He looked around the chamber one more time. In all his years as a diplomat, he had never seen so many different species in one place. Some breathed water and sat in tanks. Others floated in energy fields. A few existed as pure thought and spoke through machines. They all waited for him to speak. Honored delegates of the Galactic Council, Jake began. His voice carried clearly through the translation systems. I bring a message from the government of Earth and all human colonies. Chancellor Vexitar of the Zephyrians leaned forward on his platform. His silver eyes showed no emotion, but Jake knew the alien was listening carefully. Vexitar had always treated humans like useful servants. Today that would end. For 300 years humans have served this galaxy, Jake continued. We have fixed your machines when they broke. We have solved problems that seemed impossible. We have maintained the systems that keep your worlds alive. We have done this work gladly because we believed in cooperation between species. The chamber was completely silent now. Even the background hum of the life support system seemed quieter. But cooperation requires respect, Jake said. It requires being treated as equals. This has never happened. You call us the repair crew of the galaxy. You give us the jobs no one else wants. You take our solutions and claim them as your own. When we ask for equal representation in this council, you tell us we are too young as a species. Several delegates began to shift uncomfortably. The crystalline speaker made a sound like glass breaking, which meant disagreement in their language. Lisa stepped forward and activated her own translator. Today, humanity makes a choice. We are withdrawing from all galactic affairs. No more repairs. No more problem solving. No more maintenance. You wanted to advance without human interference. Now you can. The chamber erupted in noise. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages. Translation systems overloaded trying to keep up. Chancellor Vexitar raised his hand for silence. This is madness, Vexitar said. His voice was calm, but Jake could hear anger underneath. You cannot simply abandon your responsibilities. What responsibilities? Lisa replied. You have made it clear that humans are not equal partners in this galaxy. We are just workers to you. Well, workers can quit. Dr. Alex Brown sat in the Human Observer section uploading files to the Galactic database. These were the final technical manuals for every system humans had built or maintained. After today, aliens would have to figure things out for themselves. Alex had spent his whole career studying alien biology and psychology. He knew something the political leaders did not understand. Most alien species had very specialized intelligence. The Zephyrians were brilliant at mathematics but terrible at creative thinking. The crystallines could process vast amounts of data, but could not handle unexpected problems. The Corvaxians worked perfectly as a group, but individuals could barely function alone. Humans were different. They could adapt. They could think of new solutions when old ones failed. They could work alone or in teams. Most importantly, they could see patterns that specialized minds missed. The upload is complete, Alex said quietly to Lisa. They have all our technical data. What they do with it is up to them. On his platform, Chancellor Vexitar was speaking to the other delegates in rapid Zephyrian. Jake caught a few words through his translator. Something about servants forgetting their place and temporary rebellion. The crystalline speaker pulsed with bright light as it communicated. The humans provide useful functions, but they are replaceable. Our mathematical models show that Zephyrian engineers can maintain human-built systems with 97% efficiency. Jake almost laughed. Aliens never understood that their mathematical models only worked when everything went according to plan. Real life was messier than math. The human vessels are already leaving your space, Lisa announced. Within 1 month, no human ship will remain in Council territory. We are establishing colonies in the Andromeda Arm. We will not be returning. A Corvaxian delegate clicked its mandibles rapidly. You take your knowledge with you. This is theft of galactic resources. Knowledge cannot be stolen, Lisa replied. It can only be shared or withheld. We choose to withhold. Jake activated his communicator and spoke to the human fleet waiting outside the system. All ships, this is Morrison. Execute departure protocol. We are going home. Through the great windows of the council chamber, Jake could see the stars. Somewhere out there, human ships were already moving toward the edge of known space. They carried with them the brightest minds of humanity. Engineers who could fix anything. scientists who asked impossible questions, artists who saw beauty in chaos. The aliens would keep their perfect mathematical formulas and their specialized knowledge. Humans would take their curiosity and their refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. Chancellor Vextar stood on his platform as the human delegation prepared to leave. "You will return," he said confidently, "when you realize how small you are without the galaxy to protect you." Lisa smiled for the first time in months. "We are not leaving because we are small, Chancellor. We are leaving because we are tired of you, making you feel big." As the human delegation walked toward their shuttle, Jake looked back one last time at the council chamber. In a few years, this place would be very different. The aliens just did not know it yet. The shuttle lifted off from Nexus Prime, carrying the last official humans in council space. Behind them, the greatest experiment in galactic history was about to begin. An experiment to see if advanced civilization could survive without the one species that actually understood how to fix things when they broke.